Those are garlands that were on Baba in 1956 at the 62 at the East-West Gathering. I thought you'd maybe just like to feel them or touch them. And this was a little instrument that my husband thought up. Baba had told us to repeat his name 5,000 times, 7 million times, I don't know, lots and lots of times. And if you tried to think of the number, you'd get maybe a third of the way through and forget and not know where to start over. So my husband went down, he got about 20 of these, and you didn't pay a bit of attention to this, but as fast as you could say, Almighty God, beloved Baba, or whatever you said, then you'd tick it. And then you'd finally know when you'd done the 10,000. It was kind of a cute idea because you didn't feel mechanical about it at all because he erased all having to move a bead or anything. I haven't prepared too much, so I'm going to have made a few notes. In 51, I kind of like Henry, I'd studied and looked for everything I could find, and theosophy and everything else. And so I started around New York City asking if anybody knew of a perfect master. And I kept drumming this into people's ears, and finally a Rosicrucian lady said, yes, there was a perfect master, and if I'd write to Myrtle Beach, to Norina Machiavelli, that they would tell me. And of course it was just 2 blocks away from the Rosicrucian Center, and no, not then, it was a little farther away, but there was a New York City group with Fred and Ella at the head of it. So that was quite easy. And then I must have corresponded with India during 51 because in 52, after Baba's near-fatal accident in Oklahoma, and they're going back to Myrtle Beach in ambulances, he came to New York, and Baba had written, or Mani had, that I could help Murshida, to go and help Murshida Deuce with the interviews. I had not belonged with Murshida's group, I belonged with the Monday Night Baba group. But that seemed to be, all my life, that's kind of been it, to patch a few people together or belong in between or something. So I helped Murshida, and there were lots of very beautiful incidents. Baba's leg was still in a cast, and it was July, and very, very, very hot. And we had tried to get a fan, and had bought about the last one that this certain wholesaler had, and when we got it home, it didn't work. So the next morning when Baba was due, we took it back, and someone had stolen whatever fans he had left in the night. So the interviews had to be conducted without all the cool air that we wanted him to have, because air conditioning then wasn't like it is now. But there were 2 or 3 beautiful little incidences. One was Baba's 7-Up. He liked 7-Up, the soft drink, but it had to be prepared a certain way, and it would be 2 bottles, and one was kept on the counter at counter temperature, and the other was put in the refrigerator at refrigerator temperature, and they had to be just mixed exactly even and then brought into Baba. So once I knew it wasn't quite even, but I brought it in, and he sent it right back. So I mixed that over, and then he'd say, energy? John Bass drank all my 7-Up, or Darwin Shaw or somebody drank all his 7-Up, and of course he was kidding. So I thought, well, I'm going to tie him up. He's a perfect master, but I'll tie him up anyway. So I got a beautiful piece of ribbon and a wonderful rose, and Murshida had this magnificent goblet, and a long stem thing, and I tied this all up and was all ready for him the next time. And when he asked for 7-Up, I threw that over his right hand, you know. And I said, now John Bass can't steal your 7-Up. And of course they all laughed. Just fun stories like that, fun things that happen. Baba had terrific sense of humor. Another thing, he let me comb his hair. And I never would have asked him because I wouldn't have had the nerve. His hair was thin, not bald like we saw in the little later film last night. I don't remember if he was bald here, but it was a little tiny braid in one of them, and I don't know how we fixed the end, probably with some of the hair, because we didn't tie a bow on it. But that was kind of fun. And then it was decided, you see, the girls had been injured, and they were getting care at Presbyterian Hospital, and they had never been handled by men or even near the mandali or anything, so it was a terrific experience for those sheltered girls to have doctors examining them and so forth. And perhaps something Baba knew they'd have to know before he left the body. So Charmian, Mr. Deuce had rented a car to take them back and forth to Hartsdale, where Phyllis and Adele had found a house. And so Charmian took him for a few days, and then it was determined that she could go as far as Switzerland with them. So it turned out that I was the chauffeur. And I'd flown planes and driven cars all my life, but it was just like I had most precious eggs or diamonds or something in there in the world. I picked the girls up at the hospital, and Baba, of course, came from Mercedes after the interviews, and take them up to Hartsdale. And the first time I was just like this. I just could hardly drive that car because the cargo was too precious. So on the way up, here's Baba in complete silence, and the girls had taken a vow of silence because of the physical things they were going through. And we had all these conversations. And one of them was, I must have started it, though I don't know whether I spoke or whether I was silent too. And I said, Baba, I'd like to come to India to see you. And he said, well, you'll come if you're invited, and you won't come if you're not invited. But if you're invited, you'll come whether you want to or not. So I said, oh, yes, Baba. And then Baba made polite conversation like you would if you were a guest in the car. And he said, there are 4 M's in the car. Merwin, his name, Mara, Mani, 5 of us. And the niece, Baba's niece, Meru, and Marion. And I said, yes, Baba, there are 5 of us M's in the car. And then after I dropped them and started on home to Connecticut where I lived, I realized that they'd all been in silence. So I didn't know quite how the conversation took place. But I'm not the only one that happened to. It happened many times to lots of people. But it was fun. I'll see what else was there to tell you about 52. Baba never evidenced the pain, though he was still in this hot, hot cast, and it was July, and it was not easy. Then in 56, I gave a birthday party in February for both the Monday night group and the Sufi group. And I lived in the suburbs, and so nobody could help me much with things, but at the birthday party, here came Fred Nella with a letter from Baba saying that if the new American lovers would pay for round-the-trip fare for Baba and 4 of the men mandali, and if I would chairman it and collect the funds, that he would come, that they would come over. And they eventually did in July, and the money was all love offerings. Lots of it came in $1 or $2 a week, and each one was acknowledged and a receipt sent. And I used a little yellow receipt form that maybe some of you remember them, that had a photo of Baba on. I'd had these made postage stamp size, which is a good idea for any of you, and glued on the back. And you just tore them apart, postage stamp. And there were 2 of them, so that I'd keep tab, keeping a copy of the receipt, which one to put on the next receipt, so at least they had a choice of 2 pictures. And they all kept them and loved them, and one of Baba's little sayings on it. Well, the money all came in, and I accepted the dog show assignment and came out here and judged, and was able to set up the Hollywood Hotel and the Holiday Lodge in San Francisco. And, of course, it was in the Delmonico Hotel at 59th at Park in New York. And we all met Baba, and he went into the hotel in my husband's car, and it was a convertible, and everybody was around him. Just when we get the top back up ready to start, here would come a bunch more Baba lovers. So it was a long time getting the parade started to New York. And then Mershida had to push me forward because Baba was coming through the door. I was already inside. I don't know how that happened. And she said, aren't you going to greet your guest? And here I'd so uptight that I'd forgotten that I was Baba's hostess, that I must greet him. The men, Baba and the Mandalay, had suites of rooms there and beautiful reception rooms. And people came. We allotted about 2 or 3 minutes in the interview. And they were all booked and timed. And constant people coming, constant artists painting and drawing Baba, and beautiful things. And I guess that went on about 3 days, perhaps. And then Fred Winterfeld at that time was superintendent of one of the finest apartment houses in New York, Manhattan House. And they had a Longshops in it. And we decided to give our dinner for Baba there. And we wanted it to be like a birthday party because we knew we would never have a chance maybe to celebrate one of Baba's birthdays, and we wanted to feel that we had. So it was done like a birthday party, and poems of Rumi and poems of everybody Baba loved, Hafiz, and one from Mani, and Norina Machabelli, and Jean Foster from Schenectady, and from England, and Malcolm Slosses and Brabazons, and all of these poems were set to music and read or sang. And there was a guest table, a major table with all the early disciples around Baba. Darwin Shaw was there, Enid Kaur, and Kitty and Elizabeth. Do you remember who else sat at that table? The older disciples. Maybe Agnes Barron, I'm not sure. Agnes Barron? Well, anyway, there was this table, and we used a UN photographer, and it was an interesting thing because he had been a Jewish man living in Germany, and he'd gone through some pretty tough times, and had become then later the UN photographer, and he took magnificent pictures of Baba, and many, many, many of them, and has since passed away, and I haven't been able to get the negatives because nearly everything else he took was diplomatic, and I just couldn't get them away from his lawyers. But they have been rephotographed, and the Luck brothers have a set of all of the negatives, and they're very good. There were speeches also. Baba's Prayer of Repentance was read, and some of Francis of Assisi's prayer. And then they dimmed the lights, and they wheeled in this terrific birthday cake that Longchamps themselves had made, partly because their reverence for Fred Winterfeld, because he was the chief engineer of this terrific building. And it was, I would think, about 4 tiers, big round, had to serve 156 people. And it was done so beautifully, and on the edge of each of these tiers were tiny little white candles. And they wheeled this in all lit, with the other lights all down. And of course it was photographed, and then Baba cut the first piece, and everybody sang happy birthday to Baba, so that we felt it was a birthday, though it wasn't February. And then Baba went around. The only time someone asked me today about Baba eating, well, he ate so very little. And I can't remember him ever sitting in the kitchen in the barn eating with us. Can you? He ate so little that he probably just had it in his own cabin. But he did stay that night during the whole banquet. And then while others were eating the cake, he went around to these tables of 156 people and patted them and loved them. And it was very, very beautiful. And the woman that played the music immediately, there were only 2 people paid to entertain. We also had David Frost, who was considered the golden voice of America for poetry, read all his Hafiz and Baba's things. And the pianist wasn't quite good enough, but I wasn't professional enough to ask her not to do it. They had a beautiful tenor. And later it seemed like she was supposed to do that, even though her piano wasn't very good, because she was given $50 as the tenor was, and she immediately turned it right over to the lady that started Baba's group in Israel. What was her name? Yes, and she went on to Myrtle Beach and later went on to Israel. And
excuse me, but I remember Baba only, when he went around to all the tables, he only embraced and touched certain ones. And then when he got back to the main table, there was an announcement. All those people that Baba did not touch are to come forward and greet Baba.
Oh, that's beautiful. No, but I'm glad you told her.
He didn't touch me. And a few others, and we were saying, are we going to be left out? And we were, because he made the announcement.
That's beautiful. Good. Well, it was a beautiful program, and if you invite me down another time, I'll bring a lot of my things. This time I didn't. I had lost a niece a week or 2 ago that was like a daughter, and I kind of went blue, you know. So I didn't bring the things that I expected to, but I'll bring them the next time. And among them was this souvenir program that came with it, and it was done in gold and black lettering, and we used the photo of Baba that looks like Buddha. You know the one I'm talking about, that we were talking about, the Buddha picture of Baba on the front. And then there was a tribute inside to the mandali, wishing him a safe trip back to India. And all these people whose poems were used were mentioned, and the program entirely mentioned. It was very beautifully done. And then mentioned that there were 156 at the dinner, and I don't know how many of us took the plane. I know when I look at the thing. But a lot of us then went on to Myrtle Beach and had beautiful days down there with Baba. And this translucent photograph that always to me was magic was taken down there. And you see the magic in that white coat, but it really was there. It was a different quality in that picture somehow. And then we went on to Hollywood Hotel and had days there. Hilda Fuchs lived there then. Phyllis wasn't there yet. And Ruth White, who was then, this was 20 years before she passed away, or 15, but she was so delicate then that I wouldn't have thought she'd live till tomorrow morning. And yet Baba had her taken back to Myrtle Beach, and she lived there happy, and reached the age of 102, didn't she? And even went to India with the Kitty and Elizabeth. But it was strange, because that really, her life was so on such a thin, thin thread. Even then, when I first met her, that to have her revive and have all those happy years was just like a miracle. Mm. Then we all had to wave Baba. Oh, then the other day Nancy took me. Where are you, Nancy? Nancy? The other day Nancy drove me to, we went to San Francisco, and she drove me to Hollywood Lodge where Baba had been, and I showed them which rooms he'd been in. Do you remember the number of the room? 225, if any of you get over there. And the mandalay was on one at the right of Baba. And then I think I had the one on the left, and everybody was everywhere, and it's a very pretty place. And Fred Frey had, being a designer, had done the most beautiful shades for Baba, and broken his back bringing huge green trees in this reception room where we all met. And he had it, it was so beautiful, and dishes of fruit. It was just divine. And he went around hobbling for weeks because he threw his back out and nearly killed himself. And poor Ludd had a bad experience, too. He had thought Baba would want to be on the quiet side, not where we all were. So they had set it up. Phyllis knows about this. Are you here, Phyllis? Phyllis, they'd stocked the refrigerator and everything else in the world. She could tell you better than I could. And all the flowers and everything in the world for Baba, where he'd be quiet, away from all of us, and Baba wouldn't have it. So poor Ludd, I'll still remember how bright red his face got. He was just sick. They both worked themselves to death, he and Fred Frey, to get ready. And Baba had to come over and all the rooms be changed, and he had to be put over there in the middle, you remember? So you got Baba's room. So Phyllis was told to go and bring the things over, and she said no, she wouldn't. She wouldn't leave Baba. She wasn't going to leave Baba's side, even to bring any of this stuff over. But we had a very happy time there. If any of you get a chance, go there and remember room 225. It's such a pretty little place. And then we waved him off and all cried our heads off, and he went on to Australia and back. And then let's see what happened in 58. Oh, 58. Market Crass dancers. They were Metropolitan Ballet and all the big ballet companies, and from all over the country, a lot of them on tour, flew in and great peril and everything else, and brought their magnificent Broadway costumes and put on a ballet for Baba that was absolutely precious. And a French boy was just at the prime of his career, and his heart was broken as a dancer because he was going to have to go into the French service. He was French, and he'd have to go in and serve these 2 years. And any star knows that when you're right up there, at least a dancer, and you come back 2 years later, you've missed it. And so his heart was broken. And he'd also written all the music for this one ballet that they did. They did 2 ballets. And they were playing the Baba. And, of course, you can imagine how we all felt. We're sitting here now watching it. They'd never done anything at Metropolitan Ballet as great as this was. So when we're just all up on cloud 9 and know that, you know, a little star never tries to surpass a big one. This was a big thing. Baba gets up and announces the same night, now tomorrow night, the men have to put on a show. And the energy can help them get their props, but the men have to do it alone. Well, the heart just went out of all of us because this thing was something you couldn't top, and it was a spiritual experience that we all wanted to hold on to. But that was Baba. So I went downtown to get their props, and there wasn't a thing in Myrtle Beach but alligators. Stuffed ones, toy ones, stuffed ones, rattles, every other kind of thing, but all alligators. Fred Frey took one look at the stuff I bought, alligator panels and things, and he who loves beauty just did this and left. He just broke his heart. So anyway, it was an awful fun show. And Phyllis and all of you have to help me remember some of the skits, because I only remember 2. And Dana should be here, because this is a story on Dana. Dana was a baby in the wheelbarrow, not in a buggy, with a bottle. And Charmian says she got the bonnet for me, and he had on a baby dress. And Mr. DeLong, who was a big man, as I remember, was dressed like a big fat lady with a sunbonnet, and he was the mama. And they wheeled Dave in across the stage, and Bob was laughing like crazy, and then they dump him. And that was a quick curtain. And there were a lot of skits like this, and in justice to everybody, I want to remember, but there are only 2 I remember, that one, and then the finale. Dr. Chamberlain and Dr. Ben Heyman, who was going through kind of a sleeping sickness. He was always just going like this, completely, and Bob would be giving a story in the barn, and he'd say, "Did you hear me, Ben?" And Ben would say, of course, he'd been sound asleep, he hadn't heard a word. And Bob would say, "Did you hear me, Ben?" And that's the only way to keep Ben awake. But so he was a natural for what they had him do. So these 3 doctors, Dr. Chamberlain, who's tall, handsome, surgeon is he, from Houston or someplace, and Ben Heyman, the sleepy one, and my husband, who was smaller than the other 2, he was a Viennese. And there are 3 surgeons. And we wheel in this, some kind of a cart with this man ready to be operated on, and he's all covered with a sheet, and he's been anesthetized. And I think it was Marvin Campen. And he's anesthetized, and then all the while he's waiting and waiting and waiting to get this operation over, and these 3 doctors are talking it over. So Chamberlain and Mickey would talk it over, and then they'd go over and say, "And what do you think, Ben?" And they'd have to punch him and wake him up. And Ben would say, and then he'd fall right back down asleep. This was Ben, his health, what he was like. So that was awful funny. The audience thought it was real, and of course it was just using Ben. But so finally they decided what to operate, and Charmian says they had an old rusty sword. Do you remember what they had? Some old rusty thing. And they throw the sheets back and they start operating, make this big incision in this man. And then they pull out all the Sanskaras in one lifetime. Frankfurters joined together. Tons and tons and tons of Frankfurters. And the punchline was about all the Sanskaras in one lifetime. And that was funny. And Baba laughed. He couldn't stop. He just couldn't stop. And somebody said that my husband had a little, who was it, that had a little toy monkey that would clap his hands, because Baba wasn't allowed to speak. So they gave Baba this little monkey that could clap its hands if he liked anything. And then at the end, they presented him with a little toy alligator, formed an alligator club, and Baba was the chief alligator. And how this had all come about, and what I was asking you about Alligator Pond, the day or so before, we'd all been walking down, like you explained, to the beach. And Baba points over to this little place that didn't look to me any bigger than that room. Wasn't, was it? Pardon? Where the alligators were. And he says, "Harry," he called my husband Alligator Harry. He said, "Harry, there are 7 alligators in there." And Mickey, who had a very dry sense of humor, kept very quiet, and everyone wondered why he didn't answer. And he says, "Well, if you say so, Baba." And of course everybody roared, and from then on they called him Alligator Harry. He had known Prince Machiavelli, and when I contacted Norina, I found out that Prince Machiavelli was a Georgian prince, and he'd had a great deal of financial trouble. Was very proud that Norina had to somehow for a while support him, like we've all gone through. And he started this perfume, Norina, the Machiavelli perfume that's still on the market. And my husband and he were old bachelors together. And the way he started was a little tiny shop on Madison Avenue with a curtain. And some lady'd come along and come in, and he'd fix a magic potion and do this and put it near her ear or something. He'd say, "No, that isn't quite you." And then he'd disappear behind this curtain. Whether he had anything back there or not, nobody knows. And he'd come back and say, "Yes, that's you." And that's how he started that perfume business. The women fell for it, and they loved it, and it was good, fun business. But also there was another story of these karmic ties we all have.
Excuse me, Marion. I remember they're playing when the saints come marching in as they come back.
Mm-hmm.
They'll play that first.
You mean at the men's show?
Yes.
In the bar? In the bar?
Oh, yes, they played it in Dixieland jazz style. One of the fellows was good.
Lenny?
The saints come marching in.
Well, good. I'm glad.
That was the funniest thing I ever.
Well, what did they do? What was that like?
The whole show, I mean.
Yeah, the whole show was funny, and they didn't have any idea how to do it because we'd had this wonderful ballet, and we just wanted to crawl in the corner.
He's got the whole world in his hands.
Well, that just touched the whole world. But I thought that was 58. I thought that's when that came out. I know it was our official song. Well, it was 58. That's when they gave the show. Yeah. And that was just getting popular when we were all down there. So to us, forever, that's Baba's song. Everybody feels that way about that song. Another tie that my husband had with Prince Machiavelli, or Norina. Norina was a very beautiful, handsome, tall woman and a very fine actress. And she had been asked to play the lead in The Miracle. And it was done by Max Reinhardt, but it was done in the way that Ziegfeld used to do things, with such a magnificent cast that no matter how much money it made and how much long it was a sellout, it never could break even. And so it had that problem. Well, it was the way those extravaganzas were done then, and they were fantastic. It was just a high point in that kind of show. So that was the problem with The Miracle, and it was such a strenuous part. As I understand, she stands there as a statue during the first 2 acts or so, and then finally in the last act she comes down because there's some argument about this little illegitimate parent of a little child and whether it's illegitimate or not, and the Madonna herself comes down and blesses the child and takes it in her arms. And that was it, and it was such a hard part, the standing, that Governor Pinto's daughter did it one night or 1 week and Norina the next. And so my husband had a theater right next. I think around West 60th Street. And being a man that loved humor, he always embroidered everything. But what he used to tell was that to help the show break even, his own play, they'd suddenly ring a bell from the next theater, or somebody come over and say, "All right, they're ready for you now." And they'd drop their dice, the policemen, whoever playing dice in the basement, and the extras that weren't on the stage. One of them would hold the cards or drop the cards, the other would drop the dice or the money or whatever. They'd all run over to the other theater, put on this monk robe, grab this candelabra, go down one aisle, across the back, march back out the other, and take off these things and go back to their own crap game. But it was to help The Miracle. So this was kind of a cute little tie-in, you know. There's nothing, I don't know that he even knew Norina, but he was helping with this play. And that just about wraps up 58, so far as I can remember.
A little earlier, you were telling what it was like to be in Baba's presence.
Well, you never doubted Baba, because there were 2 things that were just there. And one was this joy that just was beyond anything in this world. And then also there was oneness with everybody and everything. And you weren't quite rational. You just kind of felt like you were about 3 feet above the ground all the time, didn't you, Phyllis? But also was this wonderful love that was between us, and this great, great joy, and the fun. Baba had great sense of humor. And it's just like Phyllis, or one of you telling about having to tell stories one day, and some of these women were just scandalized that anybody tell a funny story in front of Baba. And what he was doing was breaking down everyone's cliches. And, you know, he just knew it. And it was just a beautiful thing. Then in '62, when we all went over to the East-West gathering, one of the most profound things over there was this beautiful pandal, for instance, behind the bungalow. It's done like a huge, huge tent. It seated 5,000, didn't it? 10,000 people, 10,000 chairs. And they do it with colored cottons and make the top, and then it has little things that hang down. And it's just so beautiful, and the little birds would get up in there and flit around all the time. And suddenly there's a cloudburst. And here we are, the Easterners and the Westerners all mingled, which was to be a mingling. And the mud, within a few minutes, was clear up like this on our ankles. It just was a cloudburst, and Baba had us go round through the aisles, mingling, holding hands, circling with the East and the West. It was a beautiful kind of feeling of breaking down all differentiations, caste system, everything. Another beautiful thing there was the women with their bright saris. They might have very little, but their saris were so brilliant and so beautiful, and all of them tied different ways according to the caste that they were in. And their love of their children and having Baba bless their children. And they came from hundreds of miles and walked, a lot of them, and came by ox cart and every other way, and they just had certain hours of the day. Each group just had one period that they could see Baba and then go on home, and then another group would come in. This was very profound, very interesting. And in the incident with the terrific water, Phyllis and Billy Eaton, I think, and Adele maybe, and some of the girls even, we were just drenched. And they were taken into Guru Prasad, and their Western clothes that were drenched taken off, and they were given things of manis and meras to wear. And that was quite significant, too. And then their own things were ironed and brought back. Isn't that right, Phyllis? And so the whole thing had quite a wonderful mingling feeling about it. What else was there to tell you? In 1952, or 54, Baba had told us, or somebody had written to us, or told some of us anyway, that in 52 it must have been, he told us that we could ask for something and that we could have it. So I asked for an alphabet board and one of his scarves. Now, I don't know why the year was, so it must have been through a letter, but I got it in 54. I know that, in the fall. So 20 years later, every time I go to a center like this or anything, I'd take it. And so I was very ill last October, and I wrote to Monty and made some arrangements for the trust, and I said, Monty, this alphabet board of Baba's and this scarf should go to one of the centers. And if I'm going to, anything happen to me, it should go before, because relatives don't think about those things. So she said, don't give it to a center. We only have one alphabet board. And send it here. So I thought, well, I had to learn selflessness and to not be possessive. And the nicest thing I had was Baba's alphabet board. So I try to learn to not be possessive. So I wrapped it up, mailed it back, and it's in Baba's room. So if any of you go over there, you'll see it. It's black board with the white letters and the little blue scarf. And it was strange because the day I mailed it, I had the original little brown envelope that they had sent it in their writing, and it had been just 20 years missing either before or later of just a few days that I'd had it, which was a nice long time. So I sent it back. It was a very strange thing happened about Baba's passing. I was right in New York. You were there too, weren't you, Phyllis? Nobody called me. I was the only person within 70 miles, or 7 million miles, that didn't know about Baba's giving up the body. And Baba had told us that some of us, he would give a little inkling of his suffering, that we couldn't bear very much, but he would give us a tiny sense of it. And later, when I checked back, I had had such terrific pains in my legs that those last 2 nights that Baba was on earth. And I'm not making this up, because I was going to a chiropractor that we all use, Margaret Crastancers and Fred Ella, we all used her. Rose Smart, and I knew from my records. So I didn't know anything about it except for this awful pain I had. And about 3 weeks later, I'm reading something that Fred Ella apparently had sent out from India, and here I'm reading to my husband the report of Baba's death from Adi. It was a bad moment. So I got on the phone to Fred Ella, and we cried it all out. Then most of your darshans had gone, but Myrtle Beach hadn't gone. So I signed up to go on that, and again, 2 days, all my passport arranged and money paid and everything. 2 days before I get this sciatica, until I went to the doctor and I just stand in her room and cry. Didn't matter who was there, just scream with pain. And she said, you can't go, you can't even go in a wheelchair, and you wouldn't get back if you did go. Well, she didn't deter me from going, but I guess my husband was ill for a long, long time. And I wouldn't be able to tell you how many cables we'd had. Energy, take care of Harry. Energy, take care of Harry. And I guess he thought I had all I could take emotionally. And so I haven't been over since. I hope to go maybe this fall. I don't remember much else to tell you. But the thing you felt in his presence was joy. Well, I guess in 52, when I was asked to help in New York, put on the interviews in New York. I can't remember lots of little incidences. I can't even remember all the work I did to get the committees set up cross-country or anything. You just work hard and roll up your sleeves, and you don't remember the details. I don't even remember many orders that Baba gave me. There was one funny incident in 1956. There was a point there where it was kind of changed that we would go to India instead of, when we started collecting this money, we'd go to India instead of Baba coming over, and then it was changed back again that Baba would come over. So Margaret Krask and Elizabeth came up and helped me find the Delmonico Hotel, which is 59th Park, and a beautiful place to have it. And Margaret Krask and I decided that it'd be nice to take Baba to a Broadway show. So like idiots, we made it for the night after his arrival. Not the night of the arrival, but the next one. And we should have known they'd all be tired, but probably that had nothing to do with it. But anyway, my husband got all the tickets. And I think he got about 135 tickets. They weren't all together, but it really was filling the house. And they were all stamped not returnable. And you know what happened. Baba cabled no. He wasn't going that night. He'd go the next night. So I handed it back to my husband. I said, I know they're not returnable, and you know it, but they have to be returned. So go and do it, and don't tell me how you do it. Just do it. So he did, and they were returned, but the management took them back and sold us not quite so many for the next night. So then the fun thing was that Baba goes in, everybody's watching. It was Most Happy Fella, Frank Lesser's Most Happy Fella, about Napa Valley. Everybody's watching the play. Baba does his blessing of everyone when their minds are relaxed. And when the first curtain went down, Baba was ready to go. So half of us went with him, of course, and my husband was just shocked because he loved theater so much. He couldn't understand why first it had all been changed, and now we were insulting management by all walking out. And the management came over to him and said, didn't the gentleman from India like the show? Didn't they like the show? And he didn't know how to explain it, you know. But it taught him something, I guess. Because half of us walked out, and here's the poor management again after changing all those tickets with a lot of empty seats for the last 2 acts.
Marion?
What?
Was it Shirley Jones that was the lead singer in that?
I don't know who was in the cast.
It was, and without knowing it, she sang most of her parts, directed right where Baba was sitting.
She did. Well, I'll tell you an experience I had in Walnut Creek the other day. Guys and Dolls, 2 weeks ago, was playing up there. That's Frank Lesser's, too, and it was one of the great things he did, at least in Broadway it was, because some of the scenes were down the subway and everywhere else. The scenes were just terrific. So I went to see Guys and Dolls just because Frank Lesser had done it, and I got our tickets very late, and lo and behold, they gave us the house seats. We had 5th row on the aisle, which are the hardest to get. They save them for celebrities. But so it might as well. And there was an empty seat, just though Baba was there beside us. And the music was so like his other show, Most Happy Fella, that we'd done for Baba, that to me it was, Baba was there. And it was just as though it was 1956 again, and the other lesser show instead of this one. So it was quite an experience. That's all I remember. Yeah, my husband used to tell Baba jokes. So, oh, it was a dirty, not a dirty story, but it wasn't very nice. Huh? Well, I wasn't going to tell this, but it's apropos of yours about everybody telling jokes. Mickey had told a joke to Dr. Chamberlain, some of the men, because he never would in front of a woman. And it was sort of off color, but funny. So Baba this day in the barn makes everyone tell a joke. And finally he gets over to Alligator Harry and he says, now you tell a joke. So Mickey thinks of one, starts telling it. He says, no, you tell that other one. And he made him tell it. And it wasn't really awful bad, but it was this young couple, and they're out on a date, and they're in New Jersey. And they're trying to get back to New York because they promised their parents they'd be back or something. And, well, the roads are full. It's Saturday afternoon or night or something, and they can't. So finally they find Ringling Brothers Circus is going to New York. And then the upshot was they finally get under the elephant, and the elephant urinates on them. Of all the crazy things, and this is what Baba made Mickey tell in front of all these crowds. And, of course, Mickey mumbled it, and he didn't really tell it very loud, but a couple of women were very shocked. And Jane Haynes was sitting near them, and they were saying, isn't that terrible to tell a story like that in front of Baba? Isn't that awful? And Jane said, well, I don't know. I thought it was very sophisticated. What?
He pointed to Harry and said, "Go again, those two women up there."
Well, everybody got a different interpretation. Fred Frey said to me one day, wasn't that wonderful how Baba taught Mickey to never tell an off-color story? And I didn't get that out of it at all. I thought Baba enjoyed it. But he did break down cliches with everybody. Probably Mickey never did tell them. He didn't want to tell that one, but he had to. Have you had any questions about anything?
Kind of a silly question, but Baba laughed. Did he laugh out loud or was he...
No, he didn't make a sound. And even in Oklahoma, when he was under all that pain with his jaw and his arms and his legs and everything else, the surgeons there had thought, well, he's a very highly spiritual man, but when he's under anesthesia, he'll groan. He never did he? He never groaned out of Baba. Probably did.
A normal person should laugh. He had to hold it in. He still laughed. He had to hurt him.
By conform. Well, Monty sent a telegram anyway to Alligator Harry and said, to the man that made God laugh. It was kind of cute. He used to send lots of cables back and forth. Of course, 56 there had to because of all the problems planning this thing all around the world. Yes, it's in the background of those. Next time I come down, I'll bring all the pictures. But it's in the background of one of the pictures taken of Baba at the head table in New York, and there's a map there. And I think it was India Airlines or one of the airlines made it. It was a very pretty thing, and there's this little gold frame we put on it. We didn't know whether any $2,000 or anything was going to come in. We didn't even know how much we needed, but I think we collected about $22,000. This rings in my brain. And so we had a ribbon put on it. This was my husband's idea, too. And we'd take that ribbon just as far as we collected money toward this round-the-world trip. And it got to be a cute game, you know. Then when more money come in, and so we'd finally gotten it all, and that was behind Baba. The dayas. You all hear Phyllis? Phyllis, tell them.
When the man, his name was Otto, the head waiter or whatever it meant to be, rolled that cake up to God, he got a real spiritual shock. He got a real feeling. And also,
Yeah. Yes, the whole thing, it was just infused. It was a beautiful, beautiful day. And some people sad because they had to stay in New York, and a lot of people all ready to go on the plane. We had a plane chartered for Myrtle Beach and then on to Los Angeles. San Francisco. It was sad when we all waved Baba off at San Francisco airport. Remember? Oh, we cried like mad. Then in '58 he came over, arranged things differently at Myrtle Beach to release any rights or anything that would be for him in the property. I don't know what the arrangement had been before, but I know he cleared all that out. Baba didn't want money, he didn't want anything. The center is serving its purpose, and that's the way Baba intended it. Then when we got through, there was some money left over, and Baba designated who he wanted to go to or what groups he wanted to go to. And then when I finally closed the books, I sent the books and everything down to Myrtle Beach. I'd like to someday go through them. It'd be fun. Maybe you and I could ask Elizabeth and see them. They may have forgotten they're there. It was in about the size of a liquor box. But all the records and checks and things. Like I said, it's about all there is to tell.